thought I'd start with a little story. So those of you who know me know that I've got these little girls in my life, two little girls, Alex and Ria, who Alex is 8 and Ria is 7. And I didn't expect to have little girls in my life. I won't go through the reasons why. But there you are, there they are. And one of the things that I've found is that I've learnt a lot about, sounds a bit grand, but I've learnt a lot about what being human is, what it means, what we're really like, from being around small children. Yes, I sometimes think that we never get much older than 8. You know, people sometimes talk about people's second childhood. I think it's just your first one. I think what can easily happen with us human beings is that we, progress to about 8, and then after then we sort of pile sophistications on top of an 8-year-old, and then as you get old, very often those sophistications get wiped away, and you're back to a demanding 8-year-old again, who can be charming and delightful, and a nightmare in the next moment. I think actually growing beyond 8 as a kind of mental age is quite a task in itself, to genuinely grow up, to genuinely mature as a human being. It's quite a task in itself. Anyway, so I've been learning a little bit from what we're like by talking to little girls. So one of the things I find, for instance, is I want to tell them stories about what they were like when they were children. It's interesting, it's an instinct. Those of you who have children will know this, that quite quickly you want to tell them stories about what they were like when they were small, which for them is like donkeys years ago. It's like, that's like ridiculous. But they like it as well, and they don't mind how often you tell them. So they say, tell me that story again, and I'll tell them a story about and they laugh at all the funny bits. They never seem to tire of it, and nor do I. Anyway, so I was telling Alex, who's the oldest, this story when she was, I think, 4, when I went to pick her up. I will get to the subject, don't worry. I was thinking, how long is this going to take? I went to pick her up from nursery, and it's somehow very memorable because she can say very funny things. So her father wanted to have a sleep, and I was going to take her to the playground. And she said to me, why is Daddy having a sleep? And I said, well, he's had a very busy day. And she said, I've had a busy day. I think, well, you've been in nursery, and it's usually demanding. I've had a busy and then we went to this park, and I was doing the usual things, the swings and all that kind of stuff. And one moment she sort of ran off, and then she ran back and then grabbed hold of the wrong person's jeans. So when you're only, that high, it's quite easy to do. You run, you see the jeans that you think belong to the person that took you to the park. She grabbed hold of the wrong person's jeans, looked up with pleasure, and then, who is this? And then she, ran over to me and sort of headbutted me as they do. So I was telling her this story just not so long ago, and she said, I don't like that story. I don't like that story. And she said, I don't like you telling me that story. And what's made it even worse, I wrote a poem about it, and I was going to try and read this poem. I don't like that story. I don't like that story. And I was really struck by that she didn't like it. And I was thinking about that, and the reason she doesn't like it is because it feels like to her that you're telling her a story about when she did something wrong, or when she was silly, or she got something wrong. You know what I mean? That, how silly of her to grab the wrong person's jeans. From her point of view, it's basically a criticism. Do you see what I mean? For me, it's just like sort of almost at times unbearably poignant. There's something about the sweetness of that, the trustingness of children. I always find it even poignant the way that they just hold your hand, and she's already got to the age where she doesn't do that. But the sort of trustingness of children, which we so easily lose. I find it terribly poignant. But what struck me talking to her about it, I couldn't tell her how I experienced it. I couldn't say yes, I know to you it feels like you did something wrong and that was a difficult moment and it was upsetting and now Maitreyabandhu is reminding you of getting that wrong. I couldn't say one day you'll have a different perspective on that. And one day you'll find it very poignant. And you'll even find my wee poem about it poignant. And it'll feel sort of sweet and sad to you. And touchingly human. It somehow touches on our humanness, doesn't it? That all sorts of things. We get things wrong, we want love. It sort of touches on something, which is why I wanted to write about it. But what really struck me is I couldn't tell her that I have a different consciousness. Do you see what I mean? I couldn't say to her, no, when you're my age, she said, well, yeah, you're nearly dead. That's her perception of me, is you're nearly dead. She thinks because I was saying, she said, my mum is quite old. I said, no, she's not old, she's younger than me. She just said, yes, but you're nearly dead. As if, well, you are so ancient, somebody being younger than you is neither here nor there, But I couldn't tell her that you end up, as you grow up, with a different kind of consciousness. And that same event will feel quite different to you. Its meanings will be quite different. And I was really struck by that. So there's something very important about that for all of us, is that we can't imagine a different consciousness. It's true when you're 8. You can't imagine a different consciousness. And it's true now. You can't imagine having a different consciousness. We all think, that the consciousness that I've got now is it, don't we? Just as Alex thinks that, the whole, she's had just as busy a day as her father because she's been to nursery. She's had a busy day, So, just see how we're in exactly the same position. This is what I mean by that we're like 8-year-olds. We think that our consciousness is the end of the matter. There's no further consciousness for us. So our relationship to this figure on the shrine is a little bit like Alex's relationship to me. A little bit analogous to that. That we can't imagine a different kind of consciousness. We might have some hints of it. I mean, even with children, it's interesting with children, they can a little bit at times. Like at one point, I slightly raised my voice to the youngest one, Ria, and Alex said, she was only about 5 at the time, she said, don't shout, Maitreyabandhu, it won't help. So I was, having to be taught Buddhism by a 5-year-old. So I said, oh no, you're quite right, So there's a glimmering, and occasionally there is a glimmering, and there always had been a sense that, adults are different, but it's very, very rudimentary. Yeah? And we're in exactly the same position. Sometimes we might have a glimmering of a sense that there could be a different consciousness. But mostly we assume that our ordinary everyday consciousness, the person that's, I was going to say get on the tube, but perhaps you didn't today, the person that's arrived here, is basically the end of the story. This is your consciousness. Yeah. So the first essential of meditation, Buddhist meditation that is to imagine a different consciousness than your own. That's not, that is apart, I can't really express it. It's different from you, but not apart from you. Just as my adult consciousness is different from my child's consciousness, but it's not completely different. It's grown out of that. Do you see what I mean? It's different in one sense, if you look at it in one sense, completely different, but it's also connected. So this is the first thing we need to have some kind of imaginative sense of, is that the consciousness that I have now, just as the consciousness you had when you were 8 or 5, is not the final consciousness that you can have. That there's another consciousness that you can have. Another consciousness that is greater than your own, but is connected with your own, not separate from your own, but much more than yours, just as your adult consciousness is greater than your child consciousness, but not separate from it, not divorced from it. And even this first essential, is having a sense that, and it might be a very intuitive sense and a very inchoate sense, and you might not feel it very clearly or sharply, but that you could even live in a different consciousness. That your whole life could be lived in a different way. Now, even the word consciousness, I find, is a bit tricky, because the word consciousness in English tends to assume thought or mind, as if you have a different kind of thought pattern, which is true, but you'd also have a different attitude to people. You'd have a different way of being in the world, a wholly different response to yourself and other people. You'd be a different kind of creature. Just as an adult is a different kind of creature to a teenager, and a teenager is a different kind of creature to a 5-year-old, there's another kind of creature beyond us. Yeah? For Buddhism, this is most embodied in the figure of the Buddha. That the gold, the majesty of the figure, even the size of the figure, the fact that it's at the front of the room, raised up in front of us, that we're all sitting around it. To see it as an image for a larger kind of consciousness. Whether you like this particular image, or whether this particular image draws you or not, isn't so important. But you see what it's trying to be is like a sort of super adult to your adult consciousness. A new kind of consciousness that goes beyond your consciousness, even infinitely beyond your consciousness in this case, but is nevertheless connected with it. It's not literally separate from it. So the Buddha's not a god. It's not a sort of angel that is sort of flying down from some sort of supernatural world that you can sort of be in contact with. There's something in us that, if it was to grow to its fullest potential, would feel something like that figure. But we can't imagine it most of the time. This is one of the reasons why we have Buddha figures in the shrine room here. One of the reasons why imagery is so important is hopefully to help you imagine. The trouble is, it kind of gets caught up with kind of exotic trappings and all sorts of other stuff that perhaps aren't so useful. But what it's trying to do, and gradually will create another image over time. There'll be an image that speaks more to perhaps a modern man and woman. Very difficult to imagine that image was. It could be, but it's trying to represent a quite other consciousness that is infinitely beyond your own, but connected with your own. You know? It's more than you, but not separate from you. Yeah? So that's the first essential of meditation. It sounds rather grand, but when you sit down to meditate, really you're sitting down to meditate because somewhere you have a hunch that there's a larger consciousness, that another kind of consciousness is possible. And you can experience that in meditation. You can even experience it in your first night at meditation. Some people experience what they call beginner's mind, where you just teach someone a meditation, just get them to watch their breath, just as you did in the first half. And some people just watch their breath and their mind changes. I mean, all you need to do to get a greater consciousness, it's not very mystical. All you need to do to experience the fact that you have the potential for greater consciousness, a consciousness that quite outstrips the person that came into the room, all you need to do that is watch your breath for long enough, feel your breath for long enough. That's all you need to do. If you could, as when we meditate at the end of the practice, if you can sit and just be with your breath for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, all the time, what would happen is that your consciousness would change. It would change and grow quite naturally, not in any spooky technical way. It's not a question of technical jiggery-pokery. It's just by attending to your breath more and more deeply, becoming more and more absorbed in that, your mind naturally starts to appear in a new way. And out of that new consciousness arises another new consciousness. Out of that new consciousness arises another. And then when you open your eyes, you start to see the world with a new consciousness. I didn't get beginner's mind, but I remember very clearly when even the very early days coming here, I couldn't sort of meditate for toffee, I used to just fall asleep. But somehow, just being here, even the atmosphere here, I'd cycle back to my squat in Brixton, and things would seem more beautiful, more something. Very difficult to even say what, just more. Life seemed to have some potential. So even this language of consciousness is a bit problematic because it suggests that it's all to do with your head. But it's more that as your consciousness changes, you experience life having potential, even life having some intrinsic meaning and patterning which you can have direct experience of. Things that seem to you to be coincidences and nothing very much, seem to speak of a greater possibility in life itself, which you're partaking in. The trouble with the idea of consciousness is it sounds like it's yours as distinct from other people's, as distinct from the world. The Buddhist vision of consciousness is this arising with an inner aspect. When I close my eyes, I can feel a kind of inner world, and with an outer aspect. And that all of that is what Buddhism thinks of as consciousness. I better not go into that too much because it gets too metaphysical. But what I want to emphasize is that this new state of being is not just a sort of cleaned up hard disk. It's not just that I've got a better kind of mental processing. It's much more profound than that. My whole way of interacting with the world is changed, and the world seems to be changed by my changed consciousness. Even the world seems to become more conscious itself. I mean, I'm making this up as I go along. Perhaps one of the ways in which you start to experience this, well, let's think of two quick ways. One of the ways I experienced this very, in a way, crudely and but nevertheless valuably was when I took LSD. I've only taken it once, but I don't know whether I'm allowed to say this. Anyway, I really enjoyed it. I'm not recommending it, folks, but I really enjoyed it. I did it with a friend. I was very young, before I came along here. And when you take LSD, probably none of you have taken any drugs ever, just the occasional strong coffee is probably as far as you've gone. Anyway, when you take LSD, the world changes. The world, you see the world rapturously, at least I did. I know it can be, I don't want to encourage it because it can go horribly wrong, but for that one trip, I experienced the world rapturously. And I remember the friend that did the trip with, he said, Buddhists meditate for years to have this sort of experience, and you can just do it by dropping a tab of acid. And I remember even in that moment thinking, no, that's not right. That I knew that the world that I experienced when I dropped that tab, which had a little picture of Donald Duck on it, I remember. Why I remember that, I don't know. I remember being very nervous of taking it because I come from a very conservative background, and my mother would have thought if you smoked a cigarette, you'd have a cocaine habit by the end of the week. So having a tablet of ecstasy, I thought that's it. There's going to be these photographs of me in Coventry with a terrible, I haven't eaten for 3 weeks and all that sort of. Actually, that didn't happen. I remember I felt instinctively that the world that I was seeing was real. It wasn't just a figment of my imagination. That the world could look like this. But I instinctively also felt that opening that gate through chemicals wouldn't change me. That what would happen is the gate would close again and I'd be unchanged. And that was, I'm afraid, my experience. I couldn't get into it again. This is one of the problems with drugs. Then you can only go into that world through that gate. And then that has more and more negative consequences, sometimes tragically so. But for me, I seem to instinctively realise that, no, that isn't the way. Yes, that is real, even realer than everyday consciousness. But going through that way meant I could never integrate that experience. I never could live in a changed consciousness. It was really a smash and grab raid on a new kind of consciousness. And then I got arrested. I didn't actually. Anyway. So that's one way you might have experienced a new kind of consciousness. Another way you might have experienced it is through experiences of art or nature. So in my best looking at, I used to be at art school. When I first came along here, I went to art school. I was there with Damien Hirst. I always say I'm the one that didn't succeed. Sarah Lucas, and I was in the college at the same time. But I remember going to galleries, and at my best, on occasions, I'd look at a painting, and as I looked at the painting, my own experience became deeper. As I became deeper, the painting became deeper. As the painting became deeper, I became deeper. A new consciousness seemed to arise between me and the painting. Sometimes, on one or two occasions, to a positively spooky degree, whereby I lost all sense of being in time and space. I remember one particular experience in the National Gallery where, for a few timeless moments, I was catapulted completely outside of my range of experience. I seemed to exist for a while outside of time and space. And so did the painting. I can't say anything about it because it was beyond, I couldn't think about it. As soon as I started thinking, I descended from that world. But people have had that experience. Many people have had that kind of experience. And you see it just here. I remember one of the reasons he came was because of listening to music, going to a concert. And again, being transported out into a new kind of consciousness. Sometimes those transports aren't as abrupt as that. The other place you'll experience is on retreat, often much quieter. On a retreat, you just gradually, your mind sort of opens up and your body opens up, your heart opens up. And by the end of it, you're in a new kind of consciousness, but it's come upon you a bit like walking into mist rather than suddenly being, in a storm of newness. But you see how really to bother to come here and not to go and see Mission Impossible WW, I can't remember what the subtitle is, when he hangs onto a plane and all that kind of stuff. Not to be here instead of going to see Mission Impossible, presumably you've got some kind of vague sense that a new kind of consciousness is possible. Without that, I don't frankly know why you're here. You might be here to relax perhaps or de-stress, which is fine, that's good. Many of us need to do that, and meditation includes that. But it won't be enough to keep you going. Also, the problem of relaxing as a kind of goal is that, for me, it never motivated me. I good heavens, when I first got here, I could really do with relaxing, I can tell you. I didn't know I could, but I really could do. But it would never have motivated me. What I wanted was something quite beyond the world, quite beyond my usual consciousness, which at times I experienced, sometimes drawing. I remember painting in this kind of rapture and just, if you've ever painted and a new consciousness arises, you really just can't make mistakes. It's incredible. I even remember this in the painting in this incredible state of mind which just came upon me, actually not long after I'd come to the centre. And I remember thinking, go on, try and make a mistake, and I just couldn't. Everything I was doing was wholly integrated into the painting. So probably you've had experiences of this new kind of consciousness. And the function of meditation, the great reason that we're sitting down to meditate, is to start to discover a new kind of consciousness. But it's not a new kind of consciousness that you just experience on meditation cushions. We're trying to eventually live in a new kind of consciousness. So that how we speak to people in a shop, how we treat people at home, how we act at work, even our dreams, every aspect of our life is pervaded by a new kind of consciousness. That's the Buddhist vision of meditation. And this new kind of consciousness, as I've emphasised, is different from you and can be so different from you that it feels mystical. I've started to want to evoke this horrible R word again, religion. Unfortunately, it's become a metaphor that doesn't really work for most people because it nearly always is associated with some authoritarian god. But what it means for me, metaphorically, is a range of experience beyond what we normally think we are and who we are and what reality is. Experiences that we would call mystical or sacred or divine even. But for me, all of those words are highly metaphorical. Because if you go too far along that line, do you see how you overemphasize that this new state of consciousness is separate to me? So if you're not careful, you think it's so separate, you think it literally is. Buddhism would say that's a real mistake, that takes you into more and more problems. But the value of it is to realize that there is a new state of consciousness that is quite unlike you and can be so unlike your usual experience, it feels religious, it feels mystical. Some people have experienced this just going a walk in the countryside. A friend of mine, Satchidasa, he just said when he was a student, he was lying in his digs, he was looking out the window and he saw a plane just passing through the window. And he said just for those moments of seeing the plane, he felt interconnected with everything. Everybody on the plane, his own body, everything was wholly different. He was interconnected with everything. A wholly, what would be normally thought of a full-out religious experience, that my sense of myself is completely interfused with everything. And then the experience closed. So do you see how it's easy to either reify that into that was God on the plane, which is a mistake, or to just say, actually, that's just some sort of weird kind of aberration, nothing important. So we're trying to say that there's another kind of consciousness that you can gain access to that is actually already trying to express itself. To use sort of that metaphor, it's trying to express itself through you, a new kind of consciousness. And you're trying to participate with that, you're trying to cooperate with that. At least that's my experience, is that I feel like a really ordinary Joe, except for my name is Maitreyabandhu, which is much longer. But I felt right from the beginning of coming here that a new kind of consciousness is trying to use this metaphor. It sounds horribly like invasion of the body snatchers, but as if something more is trying to come into being, and I need to cooperate with that. That's been my experience. I've never really quite understood it, but I know it's not God. I know it's not an angel. I know it's not something supernatural. I know it's integral to my being, but it is also new. Yeah? So in a way, that's the main thing I want to say today, is that to meditate, especially if you want to meditate in a Buddhist context, you're meditating with this hunch, and it is mostly a hunch, that a new kind of consciousness can arise. Just last night I was teaching poetry, and one of the things I was stressing again and again, and any poet knows this, is when you sit down to write, what you're hoping for is a new kind of consciousness to appear that writes the poem. That's why you have this language of the muses. It's a very archaic, slightly clumsy way of saying, actually, the poem is not written by me. Every poet throughout history has known this, whether it's somebody writing now, whether it's Milton, whether it's Shakespeare. The person that writes a poem is not the person that makes a cup of tea and sits at the laptop or uses a quill. You're trying to get out of the way of something to let the poem be written. If you don't do that, you will never write a poem. You'll never paint a picture. A new consciousness wants to arise, which is more than you, but not separate from you. And what meditation is a way of helping you more reliably experience that, and then help you open that new consciousness into every element of your life. And not put any boundaries on that new consciousness. Not say, well, yeah, I'll go that far, but that's starting to feel a bit spooky. Not put any boundaries on that. Not limit that unfolding of consciousness. Yeah? So what I want to do in a minute, I want to talk about. I want us to meditate. It's about time. But what I want to do is I want to emphasise, and I'll talk about this again, I'm sure, the week after next, and I'll get Cinnamanners to talk about it some more as well next week, is I want to emphasize that you need to make an effort. A new kind of consciousness won't arise without you making an effort. I'm afraid it just won't. It can do, but it very rarely. My friend Satchidasa just lay on his bed and there it was. Manjusiya. But I think even in your experience, you were making an effort to listen. And gradually that making an effort to listen to the music becomes less and less of an effort until you're not making an effort. You are the music while the music lasts, as T.S. Eliot says. But primarily, we need to make an effort. So if you said to an artist, go to your studio, but don't make an effort, they're just thinking, what on earth are you talking about? And like someone like Matisse, he'd spend all of his life in the studio if he wasn't careful. And eventually he got so stressed, he went to his doctor, and his doctor had to prescribe hours for the studio. He was allowed to start at this time, he had to finish for lunch at that time, he had to put down his brushes at this time. And after that prescription, he kept to his doctor's prescription for time in the studio from them. Real artists work very, very hard. But an artist knows that if they work in the wrong way, it doesn't work. If they don't put in enough effort, it doesn't work. They're looking for a special kind of effort where they're very receptive to what's happening in front of them. They're not just thinking, okay, I've decided it's going to be like this. If you've ever painted a picture, you often start with that, you think, well, it's going to be blue. And then you think, no, I think it's more like yellow. And then you're finding your way. So you've got this active, searching after something, but you're very receptive to what's going on in the painting. You're actually positively alert for clues in the painting of something that seems to want to take you a bit further than yourself. I was listening to these newcomers writing poems, and one woman was reading what she wrote, and I just said, that phrase, that word there, pelican, something really important about that. That's, just listening to her, I could hear that that's the word that wanted to say more. She was a grandmother, and it was about a poem that she was trying to write about a grandmother and her mother and her little child, and Aesop's fables and the pelican. And there's something about the pelican that works with a grandmother, a mother and a child. Do you see what I mean? So you think there's something in that wants to go further. So that's what artists are always doing. They're making an effort to go further, but they're looking for something in their experience that seems to hint at something more. Yeah? So you need to make an effort, and you need to be receptive. So next week I want to get Singer Mans to sort of take off a bit further on this issue. But that's what I want to emphasise, is making an effort. And the first thing to do to make an effort is just start. Sometimes I think we spend this is me criticising myself. Sometimes I think we spend too long trying to get into meditation. Just start. So what we're going to do today is I'm just going to do a mindfulness of breathing, not in 4 stages, not in just in one stage, but in this one stage, all you need to do is count to 3. Breathe in, breathe out, say 1. Breathe in, breathe out, say 2. Breathe in, breathe out, say 3. But really see if you can stay with the breath. All of the in breath, the turning around, the out breath, all of the out breath, 1. Breathing in all the way in, turning around all the way out, feeling all that, not thinking about it, not imagining it, feeling it, 2. 3. Once you're at 3, you get a holiday. So after 3, you can just relax again, you can soften your face again, you can just feel the weight of your body. Just feel, how do I feel? Is anything? Just wait a bit, and then another 3. Yeah. So couldn't be simpler. 3 breaths. Then we just relax for a bit, not too long, a minute, half a minute. 3 breaths again. That's all we're going to do. Yeah. But see if you can make an effort to feel those 3 breaths, and in the space after the 3 breaths, see if you can just relax, and relax those parts that I was taking us through in the first half. Relax the eyes, the jaw, the mouth, and so on. Yeah? But make an effort. Make an effort for a new kind of consciousness to arise. Okay.